I'm Amanda, 32, and never expected my own parents would try to take my house from me. After saving for 7 years working double shifts as a nurse, I finally bought my dream home last year. But last Sunday, my parents showed up unannounced with my recently divorced sister, Stephanie, and slid a handwritten eviction notice across my kitchen table. "Your sister needs this house more than you do," my mother declared coldly. Before diving into this nightmare, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if you believe in standing up for yourself. Growing up in Boston, I was always the responsible older sister. While other teenagers were hanging out at the mall or going to parties, I was working part-time jobs and maintaining straight A's. My parents, Richard and Patricia, instilled in me the importance of independence and self-reliance. "Amanda, you're so capable," they'd say. "You don't need our help like Stephanie does." At the time, I took it as a compliment. Now I realize they were just justifying their favoritism. Stephanie is 3 years younger than me, and from the moment she was born, she became the family's golden child. When she struggled in school, my parents hired tutors. When she wanted to try dance lessons but quit after 2 weeks, they shrugged it off. When she dropped out of college during her sophomore year because it wasn't her thing, my parents supported her decision and let her move back home rent-free. Meanwhile, I put myself through nursing school. I lived off ramen noodles and coffee, worked weekends at a local diner, and took out the minimum student loans possible. After graduation, while many of my classmates treated themselves to vacations or new cars, I picked up extra shifts and lived with 2 roommates in a cramped apartment. Every extra dollar went into my house fund. For 7 years, I lived frugally. No fancy coffee shops, no shopping sprees, no vacations. My social life consisted of potluck dinners with friends instead of restaurants, and movie nights at home rather than theaters. Some nights, after working a 12-hour shift at the hospital, I'd change clothes and head straight to my second job at an urgent care facility. My feet would ache and my eyes would burn from exhaustion, but I kept that dream of homeownership at the forefront of my mind. Last year, it finally happened. I qualified for a mortgage and found a modest 2-bedroom house in a safe neighborhood with good schools. Nothing fancy, just 1,400 square feet with a small yard and a front porch where I could drink my morning coffee. But it was mine. Every nail in the wall, every color choice, every piece of furniture arranged exactly how I wanted it. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly settled. My relationship with my family had always been complicated. I love them, of course, but there was always this undercurrent of expectation that I would be the fixer, the responsible one, the one who would drop everything when a crisis emerged. And usually, those crises revolved around Stephanie. When Stephanie maxed out her credit cards, my parents called to ask if I could loan her money. When she got fired from her retail job for chronic tardiness, they suggested I help her find work at my hospital. When she had a fender bender and couldn't afford the insurance deductible, guess who got the call? I tried setting boundaries, but each attempt was met with guilt trips about family loyalty and how sisters should support each other. 2 years ago, Stephanie met Brian. After dating for just 3 months, they had a lavish wedding that my parents paid for, despite their modest retirement savings. They moved into a luxury apartment they clearly couldn't afford on Brian's entry-level accounting salary and Stephanie's part-time retail work. I warned them gently about living beyond their means, but was told I was being negative and should be happy for them. Their marriage lasted less than 2 years. I got the call from my mother on a Tuesday evening after a particularly grueling shift. "Your sister and Brian are getting divorced," she said without preamble. "She's devastated. You need to call her." When I finally reached Stephanie, between sobs she explained that Brian had moved out, claiming they wanted different things in life. Reading between the lines of her story, I gathered that Brian had grown tired of their financial stress and Stephanie's refusal to find full-time work. She was now facing eviction from their apartment since neither could afford it alone. I'm sorry to hear that, I said sincerely. Do you have a plan for where you'll go? Mom and Dad said I can stay with them until I figure things out, she sniffled. I felt genuine sympathy for my sister. Divorce is painful, regardless of the circumstances. I offered emotional support and even suggested some affordable apartment complexes in safe areas that might work with her budget. I thought that was the end of it. But the following week, the calls and texts from my parents became increasingly frequent and strange. Family needs to stick together during hard times, my father texted cryptically. My mother called to ask detailed questions about my house, how many bedrooms, the size of the closets, whether the second bedroom was furnished. I answered without suspicion, thinking perhaps they were helping Stephanie apartment hunt. Then came the group text from my mother. We've come up with the perfect solution for everyone. Let's discuss Sunday morning. We'll come by around 10. I had no idea that their perfect solution involved taking my home away from me. Sunday morning arrived with golden autumn sunshine streaming through my kitchen windows. I had just finished brewing coffee when the doorbell rang. Opening the door, I found my parents standing there with Stephanie slightly behind them. My father, Richard, stood tall and imposing in his Sunday best, pressed slacks and a button-down shirt, as if dressing formally would somehow make whatever he had to say more authoritative. My mother, Patricia, wore her typical family business expression, lips pressed into a thin line of determination, eyes sharp and calculating. Stephanie lingered a step behind them, her eyes puffy and red-rimmed, but there was something else in her expression, expectation, perhaps even entitlement. Come in, I said, stepping aside. Coffee's fresh if anyone wants some. They filed into my kitchen, where sunlight bathed the pale yellow walls I'd painted myself. Family photos adorned the refrigerator, including several of Stephanie and Mia's children. My father took a seat at the head of my small kitchen table as if it were his rightful place. My mother sat beside him, while Stephanie perched on the edge of her chair, fidgeting with her phone. Amanda, my father began, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he'd used throughout our childhood when announcing decisions that weren't up for debate. We've been thinking about Stephanie's situation. It's just awful, my mother interjected, reaching over to pat Stephanie's hand. Simply terrible what she's going through. To be left homeless after Brian abandoned her. I nodded sympathetically while pouring coffee into mugs. Divorce is really tough. But I thought you mentioned she'd be staying with you guys for a while. My parents exchanged a look, one of those silent communications that married couples perfect over decades together. Well, that was the initial plan, my father continued, but we've come up with something better. Something that solves everyone's problems. I'm listening, I said, setting cream and sugar on the table. My mother leaned forward. Amanda, you've always been our rock. The responsible one. The sister who is everything together. Warning bells began chiming in my head. This familiar preamble usually preceded a request for me to fix someone else's problems. Stephanie needs a fresh start, my father stated firmly. A place of her own to rebuild her life after this tragedy. I agree, I said cautiously. I actually researched some affordable apartments in safe neighborhoods that might work for her budget. Apartments? My mother's voice rose an octave. No. Stephanie can't possibly live in some tiny apartment after having such a beautiful home with Brian. The downgrade would be too traumatic in her fragile state. Stephanie sniffled on cue, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Besides, my father continued, rentals are throwing money away. Stephanie needs equity, stability, a solid foundation. An unsettling feeling began to creep up my spine. So, what exactly are you suggesting? My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Sweetheart, you're so established in your career. You're strong, independent. You could easily find a nice little apartment to rent. The room seemed to tilt slightly. I'm sorry, what? Your sister needs this house more than you do, my mother stated, her tone gentle but her eyes steely. You can start over anywhere. Stephanie needs the security of a home right now. My mouth fell open as I looked between their expectant faces. You want me to give Stephanie my house? The house I saved for 7 years to buy? The house I've owned for less than a year. Not give, my father corrected, as if this clarification improved the outrageous suggestion. You would still own it, technically. Stephanie would just live here instead of you. And where exactly would I live? I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. You could find a nice apartment, my mother said brightly. With your nursing salary, you could afford something comfortable. Stephanie could never qualify for a mortgage in her situation. So I should leave my home because Stephanie can't afford one of her own? The absurdity of their proposal left me lightheaded. It's what family does, my father said firmly. We support each other in times of need. Before I could formulate a response, my father reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He slid it across the table toward me with an air of finality. What's this? I asked, though I feared I already knew. Just a formal way to make the transition smooth, my mother explained, as if discussing something as mundane as a recipe exchange. I unfolded the paper to find a crudely written eviction notice in bold letters at the top. The handwritten text below informed me that I had 30 days to vacate my former residence to make way for Stephanie, who would be taking occupancy on November 1st. This is a joke, right? I looked up, expecting to see them break into smiles, revealing some twisted prank. Instead, my father's expression hardened. We're deadly serious, Amanda. This is what's best for the family. Best for the family? I repeated incredulously. How is making me homeless best for anyone? Don't be so dramatic, my mother sighed. You won't be homeless. You'll just be renting instead of owning for a while. Honestly, Amanda, don't be selfish. Your sister has lost everything. Stephanie finally spoke up, her voice small but with an undercurrent of expectation. I really need this, Amanda. I can't start over in some cramped apartment. I just can't. And I can. I felt heat rising in my cheeks. This is my house. I bought it. My name is on the mortgage and the deed. You can't just decide I should give it up. Actually, my father's voice took on that lawyerly tone he used when he believed he was the smartest person in the room. Family property should go to those who need it most. It's a moral obligation. Your sister has nothing, while you have stability and a good job. Family property? I echoed. This isn't family property. This is my property that I purchased with my money that I earned working double shifts for 7 years. My mother's expression turned wounded. I'm disappointed in your attitude, Amanda. We raised you better than this. Family comes first. We expect you to start packing this week, my father added, standing up as if the matter was settled. The notice gives you 30 days, but the sooner Stephanie can move in, the better for her mental health. They began gathering their things, preparing to leave as if they hadn't just dropped a bomb on my life. Stephanie even had the audacity to walk around my living room, eyeing the space and murmuring, I think my sectional would look better against that wall. I sat frozen, the absurd eviction notice still in my hands, as they moved toward the door. We'll check in tomorrow to see what progress you've made with packing, my mother called over her shoulder. And Amanda? Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. The door closed behind them, leaving me alone in the sudden silence of my home, the home they expected me to surrender without protest. I looked down at the paper in my trembling hands, reading the final line again. Failure to comply will result in family consequences. I crumpled the paper in my fist as the first tears of shock and betrayal began to fall. After they left, I sat motionless at my kitchen table for what felt like hours. The coffee grew cold in mugs nobody had touched. Outside, the cheerful autumn day continued, oblivious to the fact that my world had just imploded. The home I'd created, my sanctuary after long hospital shifts dealing with other people's traumas, suddenly felt vulnerable, as if its walls could no longer protect me. That night, sleep was impossible. I tossed and turned, replaying the conversation in my mind, thinking of all the things I should have said. Every creak and settle of the house startled me awake. Would they come back with boxes? Would they somehow try to force me out? The eviction notice had no legal standing, I knew that much, but the conviction in my father's voice suggested he believed otherwise. Around 3 a.m., I found myself sitting on my bedroom floor, back against the wall, scrolling through old family photos on my phone. There was 8-year-old me, proudly holding a science fair trophy. My parents hadn't attended the fair. They were at Stephanie's dance recital that day. There was my high school graduation, where my parents arrived late because Stephanie had a meltdown about her outfit. My nursing school graduation, where they left early because Stephanie called with car trouble. The pattern was so clear now, illuminated in the harsh light of their latest betrayal. I had always been expected to sacrifice for Stephanie. My time, my resources, my needs, all secondary to hers. And I had complied, believing that's what good daughters and sisters do. But this was beyond anything I could have imagined. My phone pinged with a text message, the sound jarring in the pre-dawn silence. It was from Stephanie, thinking about paint colors for the master bedroom. What do you think about sage green? We'll need you to remove all your wall hangings before you go. I stared at the message in disbelief. Not even a thank you. Not even an acknowledgement that she was asking me to upend my entire life. Just an expectation that I would comply, as I always had. 10 minutes later, another ping. A group text from my mother to both Stephanie and me. Amanda, don't forget to leave the good dishes. Stephanie will need those for entertaining. You can take the everyday set for your apartment. I turned off my phone. By morning, I was exhausted but resolute. This was my home. I had earned it. I would not be bullied out of it, not even by my own family. I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Then I made coffee and called my best friend, Rebecca. They did what? Rebecca's outrage was validating after the gaslighting from my family. Tell me you're not actually considering this. Of course not, I said, though a small part of me had spent the night wondering if I was being selfish. But I don't know how to make them understand that. They're completely convinced this is a reasonable request. This isn't a request, Amanda. It's insanity. You need to talk to a lawyer. A lawyer? Against my own parents? That seems so extreme. You know what's extreme? Your parents writing a fake eviction notice and expecting you to become homeless for your sister's comfort. Deep down, I knew Rebecca was right, but taking legal action against family felt like crossing a line from which there would be no return. Just think about it, Rebecca urged. In the meantime, change your locks. I wouldn't put it past them to have copied your keys at some point. After we hung up, I checked my phone to find 3 missed calls from my mother and a text from my father. We'll be by around noon to help you start sorting what to take and what to leave for your sister. The audacity stole my breath. They really expected me to just comply without question. I was still processing this when another text came through, this time from a mutual family friend. So generous of you to give your house to Stephanie during her difficult time. Your parents are so proud of your selflessness. My stomach dropped. They were already telling people I had agreed to this absurd arrangement. Before I could respond, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw my parents standing on my porch with empty boxes and a tape measure. I didn't open the door. Amanda. My father's voice boomed as he knocked harder. We know you're in there. Don't be childish. I leaned against the door, heart pounding. I'm not giving up my house, I called through the door. I need you to respect that this is my property and my decision. Don't be ridiculous, my mother's voice was sharp. Open this door right now. We need to measure for Stephanie's furniture. I'm not opening the door and I'm not moving out. Please leave. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of a key in my lock. They were trying to use their emergency key, the one I'd given them for legitimate emergencies. Fortunately, I had engaged the deadbolt, which prevented them from entering. The realization that they would have walked right in, started rearranging my home for Stephanie, hit me like a physical blow. This was not normal family behavior. This was not okay. Amanda Elizabeth Morgan. My father's use of my full name, a tactic from childhood, no longer held power over me. You open this door right now, or there will be consequences. I stepped away from the door, hands shaking but resolve strengthening. I'm calling the police if you don't leave my property immediately, I said, loud enough for them to hear. After a tense silence, I heard my mother's huff of indignation, followed by my father's grumbled threats about family loyalty and selfishness. Their car started, and I watched through the blinds as they drove away, their faces set in expressions of righteous anger. That afternoon, I called Michael Reynolds, an attorney specializing in property law whom Rebecca had recommended. His secretary scheduled a consultation for the following morning. That night, as I lay awake again, my phone continuously buzzing with messages from family members telling me how disappointed they were in my refusal to help Stephanie, I made a decision. This pattern of sacrifice and emotional manipulation had to end. For once, I would stand up for myself, even if it meant being labeled the villain in my family's narrative. The next morning, I changed my locks before heading to Michael Reynolds' office, a decision that would prove prescient sooner than I expected. Michael Reynolds' law office occupied the third floor of a converted brownstone in downtown Boston. The waiting room featured leather chairs and framed diplomas, projecting exactly the kind of competence and stability I needed at that moment. When the receptionist called my name, I smoothed my skirt nervously and followed her to a corner office with large windows overlooking the city. Michael Reynolds was younger than I expected, perhaps in his early 40s, with kind eyes that contrasted with his formal attire. He stood to greet me, shaking my hand firmly. "Ms. Morgan, please have a seat. How can I help you today?" I took a deep breath and placed the crumpled eviction notice on his desk. My parents are trying to force me out of my own home so my recently divorced sister can live there instead. His eyebrows shot up as he picked up the paper. While he read it, I explained the entire situation, my years of saving to buy the house, my sister's divorce, and my parents' outrageous demands. With each detail, his expression grew more incredulous. "Let me make sure I understand correctly," he said when I finished. "You purchased this home entirely with your own funds. Your name alone is on the deed and mortgage. Your parents have never contributed financially to this property, nor have they ever lived there. And yet they presented you with this." He held up the paper, as if they have some authority to evict you. "Yes. They seem to genuinely believe they can make this decision for me because family property should go to those who need it most." Michael leaned back in his chair. "Ms. Morgan, this document has absolutely no legal standing. None whatsoever. Your parents have no legal right to evict you from property that you own. This isn't even a proper eviction notice by legal standards. It's essentially a piece of paper with words on it." Despite already knowing this, hearing it from a legal professional sent a wave of relief through me. "Here's what concerns me," he continued, his expression serious. "The fact that they believe this would work suggests they may escalate when they realize it doesn't. Have they taken any other actions regarding your home?" I told him about their attempt to enter with their emergency key and their stated plans to return with boxes. "I see." He made some notes. "I think our first step should be a formal cease and desist letter. This would inform them that their actions constitute harassment and potential trespassing, and that further attempts could result in legal consequences." As cease and desist letter to my own parents, I said quietly, the reality of how far things had deteriorated hitting me anew. Michael's eyes softened. "I understand this is difficult. Family disputes are always complicated. But from what you've told me, your parents are attempting to bully you out of your rightful property. That's not acceptable, regardless of the relationship." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "What would the letter say exactly?" He outlined how the letter would formally state my legal ownership of the property, explicitly revoke any permission for them to enter the premises without my express invitation, and warn that further harassment or attempts to enter could result in legal action, including a restraining order if necessary. "It's strongly worded," he admitted, but sometimes that's what's needed to break through the conviction that they're in the right. We discussed fees, and while the cost made me wince, I reminded myself that this was an investment in protecting my home and establishing boundaries that should have existed long ago. "I'll need some time to think about it," I told him as our consultation ended. "Of course," he replied, handing me his card. "Take the time you need, but I would suggest not waiting too long. Based on what you've told me, your parents seem determined, and it's easier to prevent further escalation than to address it after the fact." I left his office feeling strangely lighter despite the weight of the decision ahead. For the first time since that Sunday morning confrontation, I felt like I had options beyond simply giving in or engaging in endless, fruitless arguments. When I arrived home from the consultation, I discovered exactly why Michael had been concerned about escalation. My front door was ajar, and inside, I found evidence that someone had been there during my absence. Nothing was missing, but several of my framed photos had been removed from the walls, leaving empty hooks. The guest bedroom door was open, and measuring tape and paint swatches lay on the bed. My hands trembled as I called Rebecca. "They broke in while I was out," I told her, my voice barely above a whisper. "Call the police," she said immediately. "File a report. They're my parents, Becca. They're breaking and entering, Amanda. That's a crime, regardless of who does it." After hanging up, I discovered they had changed my front door lock, likely assuming I would still have the emergency key they'd given me years ago. I had to enter through a partially open window, scraping my arm in the process. That evening, Stephanie showed up with an interior decorator, an actual professional designer with a portfolio and measuring tape. They knocked, and when I didn't answer, Stephanie used her new key to try opening the door. Finding the deadbolt engaged, she pounded on the door. "Amanda, open up. We're just here to take some measurements and discuss color schemes." I recorded the entire interaction on my phone, including her attempt to use the key. When they finally left after 15 minutes of increasingly angry knocking, I called Michael Reynolds and told him I wanted to proceed with the cease and desist letter. "Given the escalation, I think that's wise," he said soberly. "I'll have it ready for review tomorrow." The next day, I approved the letter's contents. It was formal, clear, and left no room for misinterpretation. I was the legal owner of the property. No one had the right to enter without my express permission. And further attempts to pressure me or access the property could result in legal consequences, including restraining orders and criminal charges for trespassing. As Michael had the letter prepared for certified mail delivery, requiring signature confirmation, I braced myself for the fallout. I installed security cameras at my front and back doors, informed my neighbors about the situation to prevent my family from gaining access by claiming to be checking on me, and took screenshots of the increasingly public campaign my sister was waging on social media about her heartless sister who won't help during the worst time of her life. 3 days later, my parents received the certified letter. I knew the exact moment they opened it because my phone exploded with notifications. Voicemails from my father, each more irate than the last. Texts from my mother alternating between guilt trips and expressions of disbelief that I would bring lawyers into a family matter. Stephanie's social media posts escalated to include phrases like betrayal and abandoned by my own blood when I needed them most. I didn't respond to any of it. Michael had advised me to maintain communication only in writing if necessary and to document everything. So I silently saved screenshots, recorded voicemails, and waited for their next move. I didn't have to wait long. The following evening, my security camera alerted me to movement on my front porch. On my phone screen, I watched my parents and Stephanie arrive, all three red-faced and agitated. My father pounded on the door with enough force to shake the frame. "Amanda, open this door immediately. We need to talk about this ridiculous letter." I turned on the porch light and spoke through the door. "I have nothing to say that hasn't already been stated in the letter. Please leave my property." "Your property?" My mother's voice was shrill. "How dare you speak to us this way after everything we've done for you?" This is about family, not property. You've left me no choice, I replied calmly, though my heart raced. I've asked you repeatedly to respect my boundaries, and you've refused. The letter simply formalizes those boundaries. Boundaries? My father practically spat the word. You're talking about lawyers and restraining orders against your own family. Have you lost your mind? You broke into my house, I reminded him. You changed my locks. You're trying to force me out of my own home. Those actions left me no alternative. Stephanie pushed forward, her face contorted with a mixture of entitlement and rage. You have alternatives. You could be a decent sister and help me when I need it most. Instead, you're hiding behind lawyers while I'm practically homeless. You're living with mom and dad, I pointed out. That's not homeless. And I offered to help you find an affordable apartment. An apartment? She scoffed. After I've had a beautiful home with Brian? I can't go backwards like that. It would be humiliating. So I should be the one to go backwards instead? I asked. Yes. All three of them answered in near unison, the naked selfishness of their position hanging in the air between us. That moment of clarity was powerful. They truly believed my life, my achievements, my stability were all less important than maintaining Stephanie's comfort and protecting her from the natural consequences of her choices. I'm not giving up my house, I stated firmly. Not now, not ever. This conversation is over. Please leave, or I'll be forced to call the police. You wouldn't dare, my father growled, testing the doorknob aggressively. Try me, I responded, holding up my phone to show I was ready to make the call. My mother's face crumpled into theatrical tears. I don't even recognize you anymore, Amanda. What happened to my sweet, helpful daughter? She grew up and realized she deserves the same consideration she's always given others, I answered quietly. As they continued arguing and threatening, neighbors began peering out windows, drawn by the commotion. One even stepped onto his porch, clearly concerned about the escalating situation. The public spectacle seemed to finally penetrate my father's rage. With a last threatening finger pointed at my door, he ushered my mother and sister back to their car. This isn't over, he called as they drove away. Family is forever, Amanda. You can't hide behind lawyers forever. But as I watched their taillights disappear down my street, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time, I wasn't hiding at all. I was standing my ground, in plain sight, refusing to be bulldozed by their demands. I slept soundly that night, in my own home, with new locks and security cameras standing guard against those who claimed to love me but refused to respect me. The certified letter seemed to create a brief period of silence, 3 blessed days without texts, calls, or unwanted visits. I began to hope that perhaps the official legal language had finally penetrated their sense of entitlement. I should have known better. On the 4th day after they received the letter, my phone pinged with a notification from my security system. I opened the app to see my parents' car pulling into my driveway. My stomach instantly knotted with dread. Through the camera, I watched them approach my front door. My father's face was flushed deep red, a vein visibly throbbing at his temple, his classic sign of barely contained rage. My mother appeared tearful but determined. Most surprising was the presence of Uncle James, my father's brother and a real estate agent, trailing behind them with a portfolio tucked under his arm. The doorbell rang, followed immediately by my father's heavy knocking. I took a deep breath, turned on the camera's recording function, and opened the door, keeping the security chain engaged. Amanda, my father's voice was clipped, controlled with obvious effort. We need to discuss this situation like adults. I've made my position clear, I replied, working to keep my voice steady. There's nothing to discuss. Don't be difficult, my mother interjected. We've brought James to help resolve this situation fairly. Uncle James stepped forward, professional smile in place. Amanda, I've run some numbers on your property. I think we can find a solution that works for everyone. There's already a solution, I said. I continue living in the home I purchased, and Stephanie finds housing within her means. My father's tenuous control slipped. This is ridiculous. You have options, Amanda. Your sister has none. That's not true, I countered. Stephanie has the same options everyone has. Get a full-time job, save money, live within her means. After everything we've done for you, my mother's voice quavered with practiced emotion. This is how you repay us? By turning your back on family when we need you. I'm not turning my back on anyone, I replied. I've offered emotional support. I've offered to help Stephanie apartment hunt. I've offered to help her create a budget. What I won't do is give up my home. Uncle James cleared his throat. Amanda, I've brought some comparable listings for apartments in the area that would suit your needs. Much less maintenance than a whole house for one person. I stared at him in disbelief. You really came here thinking you could convince me to downgrade my living situation so Stephanie doesn't have to? It's not a downgrade, my mother insisted. It's being practical. You're just one person. Stephanie might have children someday. She needs the space more. Might have children someday? I repeated. That's your argument for taking my house now? My father's patience evaporated. Enough. This isn't a request anymore, Amanda. This is what's happening. Your sister is moving in here next week. You can either cooperate and let James help you find a suitable apartment, or you can make this difficult and damage your relationship with this family permanently. Something inside me snapped. All the years of compliance, of putting others' needs before my own, of being the reasonable one, the responsible one, the one who would sacrifice without complaint, it all crystallized into a moment of absolute clarity. I closed the door, unlatched the security chain, and stepped onto my front porch, fully facing them for the first time. My security camera continued recording over my shoulder. Let me be perfectly clear, I said, my voice remarkably calm despite the adrenaline coursing through me. This is my home. I bought it with my money. My name is on the deed and the mortgage. I will not be leaving. Stephanie will not be moving in. Not next week, not ever. You selfish, ungrateful, my father began, stepping toward me with his finger raised. Richard, Uncle James cautioned, placing a restraining hand on my father's arm. No, I continued. What's selfish is expecting me to give up everything I've worked for because Stephanie's marriage failed. What's ungrateful is raising me to be independent, then punishing me for that independence when it doesn't serve your purposes. My mother stepped forward, tears flowing freely now. We're your parents, Amanda. We know what's best. I'm 32 years old, I interrupted. I'm a registered nurse who has supported herself since college. I make my own decisions about what's best for me. You're choosing property over family, my father accused, his voice rising to a near shout. No, I countered. I'm choosing to maintain appropriate boundaries. You're the ones who decided that me keeping my own home means I don't love my family. Stephanie, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly pushed forward. This is so typical. Amanda always gets her way because she's the perfect daughter with the perfect job. Meanwhile, I'm going through hell and nobody cares. We care, sweetheart, my mother soothed, wrapping an arm around her. Clearly not enough. Stephanie cried. If you cared, you would make her give me the house. You're my parents. Make her do it. The childish demand hung in the air, revealing the dynamic that had defined our family for decades. Stephanie demands, my parents enable, and I'm expected to accommodate. Not anymore. I have the right to refuse entry to anyone, I stated clearly. I'm exercising that right now. Please leave my property immediately. Or what? My father challenged, his face now purple with rage. I held up my phone. Or I call the police and report you for trespassing, as clearly stated in the cease and desist letter you received. You would call the police on your own family? My mother's voice was scandalized. You would try to steal my house from me? I countered. We stood at an impasse, the autumn breeze rustling the leaves around us as neighbors began to notice the confrontation. Across the street, Mrs. Hernandez paused while watering her mums, watching with concern. Next door, the Thompsons stepped onto their porch, clearly wondering if they should intervene. My father noticed the audience we were attracting. Public image had always been important to him. His jaw worked as he struggled with his rage, but finally, he took a step back. "This isn't over," he said, his voice low and threatening. "You think some lawyer's letter protects you? We're family. We'll always be family. And family obligations don't disappear because you hire a lawyer." "You're right about one thing," I agreed. "We'll always be family. But that doesn't give you the right to take what's mine or make decisions about my life." "Let's go," Uncle James urged, clearly uncomfortable with how the situation had devolved. "This isn't productive." As they turned to leave, my father made one last attempt. "When you come to your senses and remember what family means, don't expect us to welcome you back with open arms. When you come to your senses and remember that respecting boundaries is part of loving someone, maybe we can rebuild our relationship," I responded. They walked to their car, my mother and Stephanie shooting tearful, accusatory glances over their shoulders. As they pulled away, my father rolled down his window. "We raised you better than this," he called, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Yes," I agreed, standing tall on my front porch. "You raised me to work hard for what I want and to stand up for myself. I'm doing exactly that." As their car disappeared down the street, I noticed my hands were shaking. The adrenaline crash left me lightheaded, and I sank onto my porch swing, breathing deeply. Mrs. Hernandez crossed the street, concern etched on her kind face. "Amanda? Are you all right, dear?" That looked intense. "Family disagreement," I managed with a weak smile. "Sounded like more than that," she said gently. "Do you need anything? Company? A cup of tea?" Her simple kindness brought tears to my eyes. "I'm okay," I assured her. "But thank you. Really." After she left, I went inside and downloaded the security footage, sending it immediately to Michael with a brief explanation of what had transpired. His response was quick. "This strengthens our position if we need to pursue further legal action. You handled it perfectly. Let me know if they return." That evening, I sat alone in my living room, the home I had fought to protect now feeling both like a sanctuary and a battlefield. The silence was profound after the emotional storm of the confrontation. For the first time in my adult life, I had directly opposed my family's wishes without eventually giving in. The liberation was dizzying, but tinged with grief for what this might mean for our relationship going forward. My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca, just checking in. "How are you holding up?" They came by. "It got ugly," I replied. But I stood my ground. "I'm coming over with wine and takeout. No arguments." An hour later, Rebecca arrived with Thai food, wine, and fierce loyalty. As we sat on my living room floor eating pad Thai from cartons, I recounted the confrontation. "I'm so proud of you," she said when I finished. "Do you know how hard it is to break patterns that have existed your entire life? You did it. You actually did it." I might have lost my family in the process, I admitted, the reality of that possibility creating a hollow ache in my chest. "If they can't respect your most basic boundaries, maybe some distance is needed," Rebecca said gently. Healthy relationships don't involve taking someone's home because another person wants it. That night, after Rebecca left, I walked through each room of my house, touching the walls, appreciating the space I had created for myself. Whatever happened with my family, reconciliation or estrangement, this place was mine. I had earned it. I deserved it. And for the first time in my life, I had fought for what was mine without backing down. I slept soundly, more at peace in my home than I had been since that fateful Sunday when they first presented their outrageous demand. The days following the confrontation brought a strange new reality. My phone, once constantly buzzing with family demands, fell silent. No calls from my parents. No texts from Stephanie. No family friends reaching out to check in or, more accurately, to pressure me into compliance. The silence was both a relief and disorienting, like the sudden quiet after a thunderstorm passes. At first, I waited anxiously for the next escalation. Would they try to enter my home again? Would they show up at my workplace? Each time my phone notification chimed, my stomach clenched with dread. But as days passed without contact, I began to relax, cautiously hopeful that perhaps the legal letter combined with my firm stance had finally penetrated their sense of entitlement. That hope was short-lived. 1 week after our porch confrontation, the silence broke, not with direct contact, but through the grapevine. My cousin Melissa called, her voice tentative. "Amanda? I just wanted to check on you. I heard about what happened. What exactly did you hear?" I asked carefully. Her hesitation spoke volumes. "Well, Uncle Richard and Aunt Patricia said you're going through some kind of crisis, that you've become very materialistic and turned your back on the family when Stephanie needed help. They're really worried about you." Of course, they were spinning the narrative. "That's not what happened, Melissa." After I explained the actual situation, my parents demand that I give up my house to Stephanie, the fake eviction notice, their attempts to enter my home without permission. Melissa's shocked silence told me everything I needed to know about what version they'd been spreading. They wanted you to give up your house? The one you saved for years to buy? That's not okay, Amanda. Melissa's support was unexpected but deeply appreciated. However, she was the exception. Over the next few weeks, I received numerous calls and texts from extended family members, each one beginning with concern about my mental state or disappointment in my selfishness, clearly echoing my parents' version of events. With each call, I calmly explained the truth. Some, like Melissa, were horrified by my parents' actions. Others clearly didn't believe me or felt that regardless of the circumstances, family comes first, meaning I should sacrifice regardless of how unreasonable the demand. The most surprising call came from my Aunt Ellen, my mother's sister, whom I'd always perceived as firmly in my parents' camp. "Amanda, it's Aunt Ellen. Do you have a moment to talk?" I braced myself for another lecture about family obligation. "Of course, Aunt Ellen. I heard what Richard and Patricia are trying to do with your house," she said without preamble. "I want you to know I think it's completely inappropriate, and I support your decision to stand your ground." Stunned, I sank onto my couch. "You do?" "Absolutely. This isn't the first time they've pulled something like this, you know." "What do you mean?" Ellen sighed heavily. "When your grandfather died, your mother convinced him to leave his lake house to her instead of splitting it between us, as he'd always planned. She claimed I was financially stable and didn't need it like she did." Sound familiar? The parallel was unmistakable. "What happened?" "I fought it in court and won, because fortunately, my father had already signed the original will. Your mother didn't speak to me for 3 years. Ellen's voice softened. "Family patterns repeat, Amanda. Your mother learned this behavior somewhere, and unfortunately, she's taught it to Stephanie. And to me," I added quietly. "No," Ellen corrected firmly. "You broke the pattern. That takes tremendous courage." After we hung up, I sat processing this new information. The family dynamic I'd experienced wasn't isolated to my generation. It was a pattern with roots extending back decades. Somehow, that knowledge made my stand feel even more important. While extended family reactions were mixed, my workplace became an unexpected source of support. When I returned after taking a few personal days, my nurse manager, Diane, called me into her office. "Amanda, is everything okay? It's not like you to take unplanned time off." Something about her genuine concern broke through my composure, and to my mortification, I found myself fighting tears as I gave her a condensed version of the situation. Rather than the awkward response I expected to such personal information, Diane reached across her desk and squeezed my hand. "I've watched you work double shifts for years to save for that house. The dedication you showed was extraordinary. Don't let anyone take that from you, family or otherwise." Word spread among my colleagues, not as gossip, but as a rallying cry. Nurses understand boundaries better than most. Our profession requires them. The support manifested in practical ways: covered shifts when I needed to meet with my lawyer, home-cooked meals dropped off when I was too emotionally exhausted to cook, and even offers to stay over if I felt uncomfortable alone. Rebecca took her support to another level, organizing what she called a house blessing with our closest friends. "We're reclaiming your space," she announced, arriving with sage, candles, and several of our mutual friends. "No more negative energy from family drama in this house." I laughed at her New Age approach, but the sentiment behind it touched me deeply. As we moved from room to room, lighting candles and sharing positive wishes for my home, something shifted. These walls that had recently felt like the center of a battlefield began to feel like a sanctuary again. "To Amanda," Rebecca toasted, raising her glass in my living room as our small gathering concluded, "who taught us all that setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary." While my immediate support circle strengthened, the situation with my immediate family deteriorated further. Stephanie took to social media with a vengeance, posting vague but pointed statuses about discovering who truly loves you during hard times and the pain of family betrayal when you're at your lowest. She never named me directly, she was too clever for that, but her followers, including many mutual acquaintances, knew exactly who she meant. I refused to engage in the public drama. Michael had advised maintaining a dignified silence, documenting everything but responding to nothing. Any public response just feeds the narrative that this is a two-sided family disagreement, rather than what it actually is, an attempted property grab, he explained. Instead of responding online, I channeled my energy into securing my home and my peace of mind. I installed additional security measures, including cameras covering all entry points. I joined a homeowners association committee, establishing deeper connections with neighbors who now kept a watchful eye on my property when I was at work. 3 weeks after the confrontation, I discovered through a chance conversation with my mortgage lender that someone had called inquiring about my mortgage details, claiming to be my financial advisor. The lender, following privacy protocols, had revealed nothing, but the attempt itself was chilling. When I described the incident to Michael, his expression darkened. "That crosses another line," he said gravely. "Attempting to access your financial information could potentially be considered identity fraud, depending on exactly what was said and asked for. I recommend filing a police report to document the attempt, even if no information was obtained." Filing that police report, officially documenting that I suspected my own parents of attempting to access my private financial information, marked another painful milestone in this ordeal. The officer who took my statement was professional but couldn't hide his surprise at the situation. "Family disputes over property are common," he noted, "but usually it's after someone dies, not when everyone's still alive and the ownership is clear." "My family isn't typical," I responded with a sad smile. By the 2-month mark, a new normal had established itself. The acute crisis had passed, but the aftershocks continued. Thanksgiving approached, the first family holiday I would miss. Though I received several invitations from friends, the thought of celebrating while this family wound was still so raw felt impossible. Instead, I volunteered to work the holiday shift at the hospital, finding solace in caring for patients who appreciated my presence. That Thanksgiving evening, exhausted after a 12-hour shift, I returned home to find a small package on my doorstep. Inside was a hand-knitted scarf and a note from Aunt Ellen, "Thinking of you today. Family is complicated, but you're never alone. Love, Aunt Ellen." I wrapped the scarf around my shoulders and allowed myself, finally, to cry, not just for the family relationships that had fractured, but for the new connections that had strengthened in unexpected ways. The following week brought another surprise. My phone lit up with Stephanie's name, the first direct contact from my immediate family in nearly 3 months. My heart raced as I answered. "Amanda?" Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered, less entitled. I need some medical advice." I didn't know who else to call. Not an apology. Not an acknowledgement of her role in the house debacle. Just another need, another request. But there was something different in her tone, a tentative quality that had never been there before. "What's going on?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She described symptoms that sounded like a minor infection, nothing serious, but causing her discomfort. I gave her straightforward advice about over-the-counter treatments and when to see a doctor if things didn't improve. "Thanks," she said awkwardly when I finished. How are you?" "I'm okay," I replied, unwilling to share more until I understood her intentions. "That's good." A long pause followed. "I found an apartment. It's small, but it's near my new job." "You got a new job?" This was surprising news. Stephanie had rarely maintained steady employment. "Yeah, assistant manager at Nordstrom. The hours are long, but the discount is great." She attempted a laugh that fell flat. "Anyway, I just wanted you to know." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. A small olive branch, perhaps, or at least an acknowledgement that life had moved forward without my sacrifice. After we hung up, I sat pondering what this might mean for our future relationship. The hurt was still too fresh for forgiveness, but perhaps, eventually, a new type of relationship might be possible, one built on mutual respect rather than expectation and obligation. As Christmas approached, I received a card from my father. Inside, beneath the generic holiday greeting, he'd written a single line: "You were right. I was wrong. I'm sorry." No elaboration, no excuses, just those 8 simple words in his precise handwriting. I placed the card on my mantel, neither responding nor discarding it. Like Stephanie's call, it wasn't enough to heal the damage done, but it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that boundaries, once established and defended, could eventually be respected. That evening, sitting in my living room with the Christmas lights twinkling, I looked around at the home I had fought for and saved. The walls that had witnessed such drama now held peace again. The space that had been threatened now felt more securely mine than ever before. Family relationships remained complicated and tentative, but one thing had become crystal clear through this ordeal. I had found my voice. After a lifetime of accommodation and sacrifice, I had finally drawn a line and stood firm. Whatever happened next with my family, that discovery, that capacity to defend my own worth, was something no one could ever take from me. 6 months after my parents tried to claim my house for Stephanie, spring arrived in Boston, bringing renewal in more ways than one. My garden beds, which I'd neglected during the family crisis, now burst with early tulips and daffodils. I'd spent weekends turning soil and planting bulbs, finding therapy and creating beauty around the home I'd fought to keep. Inside, my house had transformed as well. What had once been decorated with family photos and heirlooms now showcased artwork from local artists, travel souvenirs, and gifts from friends who'd supported me through the darkest days of the family estrangement. Each new addition represented a conscious choice to make this space truly mine, free from the weight of family expectations. My relationship with my immediate family had evolved into something I never could have predicted. The complete silence following my father's Christmas card lasted nearly a month before my mother reached out with a text message on my birthday. "Thinking of you today. Hope you're well." No guilt, no demands, just an acknowledgement of my existence on a day that mattered. I responded with a simple "thank you," leaving the door cracked open without rushing through it. Stephanie and I had established a strange new dynamic. After her call for medical advice, she'd reached out sporadically, never about the house situation, never with apologies, but with small talk and occasional updates about her life. She'd kept the job at Nordstrom, maintained her apartment, and even started dating someone new. Our conversations remained superficial but civil, like distant acquaintances rather than sisters with a lifetime of shared history. One Sunday afternoon in April, as I pruned rose bushes in my front yard, a familiar car pulled into my driveway. My father sat behind the wheel, alone, his posture rigid with what I recognized as nervousness rather than anger. I set down my gardening shears and waited as he slowly exited the car and approached. Your roses are coming in nicely, he said, gesturing awkwardly toward the bushes. Thank you. I remained standing, pruning gloves still on my hands, creating a tableau that emphasized this was my territory, my home. I've been driving by sometimes, he admitted. Not in a creepy way, just to see if you're okay. I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Amanda, he began, then cleared his throat. I owe you more than the note I sent at Christmas. What your mother and I did, what I did, was inexcusable. We had no right to demand your home for Stephanie. No right to try to make you feel guilty for something you worked so hard to achieve. His words hung in the spring air between us, genuine in a way I hadn't heard from him in years, perhaps ever. What changed? I asked finally. He looked down at his hands, weathered and spotted with age in a way I hadn't noticed before. Therapy, he said, the word clearly uncomfortable in his mouth. Your mother and I, we've been seeing someone. Together and separately. It was her idea, actually, after Stephanie's last episode. Episode? My father sighed heavily. After you refused to give up your house, and especially after that lawyer's letter, Stephanie expected us to buy her a house instead. When we explained we couldn't afford that with retirement approaching, she had a complete meltdown. Accused us of never loving her, of favoring you. It was like watching a 30-year-old toddler. That must have been difficult, I said carefully, surprised to find I genuinely meant it. It was illuminating, he corrected. The therapist helped us see the patterns we've created. How we've enabled Stephanie's dependency while placing unfair expectations on you to be the perpetual problem solver. He met my eyes directly. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Amanda. What we did was wrong on every level. I just wanted you to know that I recognize that now. I invited him to sit on the porch steps, not inside my home, not yet, but a middle ground where conversation felt possible. For nearly an hour, we talked more honestly than we had in my entire adult life. He explained how his own upbringing had shaped his parenting style, creating the dichotomy between Stephanie as the needy child and me as the capable one. He acknowledged the unfairness of expecting me to continually sacrifice while never asking Stephanie to develop self-sufficiency. Your mother is still struggling with these realizations, he admitted. She wants to make amends, but isn't quite ready to face you. Admitting we failed as parents in some fundamental ways is difficult. You didn't fail entirely, I offered, surprising myself with the generosity I now felt capable of extending. You raised me to be independent and hardworking. Those aren't small things. As he prepared to leave, he handed me an envelope. This doesn't make up for anything, but it's a start. Inside was a formal letter, notarized and legally binding, affirming that Richard and Patricia Morgan acknowledged Amanda Morgan as the sole and rightful owner of her property, relinquished any perceived familial claim to said property, and apologized for previous attempts to assert otherwise. Michael helped me draft it, my father explained, naming my lawyer with a rueful smile. I wanted it to be official. No more ambiguity. That evening, after my father left, I sat on my front porch swing, the letter in my lap, watching the sunset paint my little piece of the world in golden hues. The document didn't heal all wounds, but it represented something profound. An acknowledgement of my boundaries, a recognition of my right to determine my own path. My therapy sessions, which had initially focused on coping with family estrangement, had evolved into explorations of deeper patterns. Dr. Levine had helped me recognize how my identity had been shaped by always being the responsible one, the caretaker, the person who sacrificed without complaint. The crisis with your house forced a reckoning, she observed during one session. You had to decide if your needs matter as much as everyone else's. That's a profound shift for someone who's been conditioned to put others first. She was right. Standing firm about my home had catalyzed changes in every aspect of my life. At work, I no longer volunteered for every difficult shift or undesirable assignment. I'd learned to say no without accompanying explanations or apologies. My friendships had deepened as I allowed myself to be vulnerable, to need support rather than always providing it. Most significantly, I'd begun dating again after years of putting romance on the back burner while focusing on career and homeownership. James, an emergency room doctor I'd known professionally for years, had asked me to dinner shortly after the family confrontation. In the past, I would have declined, citing work commitments or family obligations. Instead, I said yes. 6 months later, our relationship had blossomed into something meaningful and balanced. James understood boundaries professionally and personally, never pushing but always present. When I finally shared the full story of my family's attempt to take my house, his outrage on my behalf was validating, but his respect for my handling of the situation was even more so. "You didn't need rescuing," he observed one evening as we prepared dinner in my kitchen. "You saved yourself." As spring turned to summer, my relationship with my family continued its careful reconstruction. My mother eventually reached out for coffee, the meeting awkward but civil. Stephanie and I established a monthly lunch date, neutral territory where we were beginning to forge a relationship based on who we were now rather than the roles we'd been assigned in childhood. The process wasn't linear. There were still difficult moments, old patterns that threatened to resurface, instances where I had to reassert boundaries firmly. But each time I did so, it became easier, more natural, like building a muscle that had atrophied from disuse. 1 year to the day after my parents had presented their outrageous eviction notice, I hosted a housewarming party. Not because the house was new, but because my relationship with it had evolved. This was no longer just the home I had saved for and purchased, nor the home I had defended against family entitlement. It was simply and completely mine, a physical manifestation of the boundaries I had learned to establish in all areas of my life. Friends filled the rooms with laughter and conversation. Rebecca toasted to walls that protect and doors that open only when welcome. Dr. Levine, who had become a friend as well as a therapist, brought a doormat reading "Boundaries Enforced Here" that made me laugh until tears came. Most surprisingly, my parents attended briefly, bringing a potted plant and keeping their visit short but pleasant. Stephanie sent her regrets with a gift card to a home improvement store, a small acknowledgement of my right to continue making this space my own. As the party wound down, I found myself alone on the back deck with Aunt Ellen, whose support had never wavered throughout the ordeal. "I'm proud of you," she said, squeezing my hand. "Not just for keeping your house, but for everything that came after. Do you know how rare it is for someone to break generational patterns the way you have?" "It doesn't always feel like a victory," I admitted. "Sometimes it just feels lonely." "Setting boundaries often does," she nodded. "But look around you. You've created something beautiful here. Not just this home, but this life. A life where you matter as much as everyone else." Later that night, after all the guests had gone, I walked through each room of my house, turning off lights and straightening cushions. In the guest bedroom, which had never become Stephanie's room, I had created a small home office where I was taking online courses in healthcare administration. In the kitchen, new copper pots hung above the island where James and I had cooked countless meals. In the living room, bookshelves housed volumes I'd never had time to read until I'd learned to carve out space for my own interests. Every corner of this house told the story not just of what I had prevented, my sister's entitlement, my parents' overreach, but of what I had created, a life determined by my choices, shaped by my values, protected by boundaries I now understood were not selfish but necessary. As I climbed into bed that night, I thought about the journey of the past year. The pain had been real, the confrontations difficult, the family reconfiguration ongoing. But the peace I now felt in my own home, in my own skin, was worth every difficult conversation, every moment of standing firm. The house keys on my nightstand were more than just metal objects that unlocked doors. They represented the most valuable lesson I had learned, that I held the keys to my own life, and no one, not even family, had the right to demand I hand them over. I drifted to sleep in the house that was mine, surrounded by the life I had chosen, at peace with the boundaries I had finally learned to set and defend. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who overstepped their boundaries? Or maybe you've struggled with setting boundaries in other relationships. Share your experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to hear more stories about standing up for yourself and creating the life you deserve. Remember, setting boundaries isn't selfish, it's necessary for healthy relationships. Thank you for watching, and I wish you the courage to hold onto your own keys, whatever they may represent in your life.